So this is NHL Stanley Cup, released in 1993 for the Super Nintendo Entertainment System. Published by Nintendo and developed by Sculptured Software, NHL Stanley Cup broke away from the usual kind of hockey game by focusing on the 3D behind the player viewpoint, making use of the console's Mode 7 technology that has been served well in past Super Nintendo iterations such as F-Zero and Hyperzone. This game is one of the few Super NES cartridges to feature language selection, so you could play Stanley Cup in either English or en français. As such, some footage will feature gameplay in English, and some footage will feature gameplay in French. Not just because the French gameplay is between two hockey teams based in the province de Québec-Est, but also demonstrates the different typefaces used for the two languages during actual gameplay. The entire review, however, is spoken entirely in English, because by the 24th century, French will be nothing more than an obscure language, and every Frenchman will be speaking with English accents. Except for this guy. This guy still represents. Stanley Cup is a very interesting beast of a hockey video game. This game possesses the NHL license, which means you have all 26 NHL teams of the 1992-1993-ish season, but is also lacking the NHLPA license, which means no actual player names, just numbers. You can choose to play either a quick exhibition game, go for a playoff tournament, or dabble in an entire season of NHL Mode 7 action stuff. From there you play your game of hockey. 3 periods of predetermined length, score more goals than the other team to win, there's penalties if enabled, line changes if enabled, and instant replay when you pause the game. Pretty straightforward stuff in that regard. When people talk about the game, the one thing I've read or heard is that the camera implemented in Stanley Cup is what either made or broke the game. The camera, of course, is what flips the playfield around and follows the puck around as well as the player possessing said puck. Generally the same thing. The one thing I'll say about the camera is that it makes the game difficult to follow and digest. The game plays at such a fast pace more often than not that it can get disorienting to process your surroundings, especially when the camera is focused solely on the lone puck and all your players are behind the camera, so you have no clue as to what's going on. I'm sure the idea was to bring players closer to the game and see the action through the perspective of an actual hockey player on the ice, but I'm also sure that actual hockey players have better animation and don't move as choppily as the players in Stanley Cup do. Also, I'm pretty sure the arenas are better lit and don't have this weird blue void surrounding the place. And where are the billboards? Can't forget the billboard advertising. What did hockey advertise in 1993? I don't remember. Or I don't know. Quite frankly, I don't care. It bears no relevance. Why did I bring it up? I don't know, I'm just filling time. Moving on. Here's the thing that bugs me the most about the camera. It's something that's not too common, but happens enough to be an annoyance regardless. When one of your players grab hold of the puck, the camera will automatically rotate so that you get the back view of your puck-possessing player. During this time that the camera's rotating, the controls seem to fall into something of a locked state, which means you can't really do much beyond move your player around, and not by much even then. That means no passing, no shooting, all your controls are pretty much frozen. So here you are in a potentially ideal scoring situation, and you grab hold of the loose puck, and you're basically frozen until the camera rotates to focus on your player's backside. And when the camera is done reorienting itself on your lovely derrière, you've already lost possession of the puck because of the handful of opposing players that isn't frozen by a rotating camera. Control is everything in a video game, especially one adapting an intense, fast-paced sport such as ice hockey. And while control in Stanley Cup in general isn't entirely terrible, this one nugget makes it what's already a tense situation needlessly more so. And speaking of control in general is functional at best. You could move around, you could pass the puck, do a slap shot, wrist shot, switch players in cyclical fashion, check, that sort of thing. There's a couple of oddities to be found here. I've already mentioned the locked controls when the camera is rotating to focus on your player's butt. But then there's this bit during face-off where I'm tapping buttons to nab the puck when the ref drops it. And I'm waiting for that drop off, and I'm waiting, and it's only when I stop tapping buttons when the ref decides to drop the puck. No other hockey game I've played has this bit where the ref would wait until you stop fapping your stick like an idiot before dropping the puck. That would not only be stupid, but also make face-offs much more difficult to win. Which is certainly the case here with Stanley Cup. Also, I've heard that scoring in Stanley Cup is rather difficult and often requires you to exploit some kind of flaw in the AI to get equal scoring opportunities. I don't know, I seem to be doing fine here, but I don't know. I'm usually not that good at these kinds of games anyway, so... whatever. I got other issues with the game besides the scoring anyway, so... Moving on. So I made that one mention about how the players in Stanley Cup having this awkward, choppy frame rate when they're on the ice, but the players themselves are fairly basic looking. Obviously, they all look the same with only the jerseys being color swapped depending on the team being played. For the most part, they look alright, they have a bit of size to them, an important thing to have when the action is presented from the ice rink as opposed to an overhead perspective. The Mode 7 camera rotation and whatnot, at the very least, moves about smoothly and without much jitter, but I think it also makes the action somewhat difficult to follow, as I mentioned before. Your mileage may vary in this regard, of course, but outside of the main action, the intermission scenes with the sportscaster reporting the action is a nice touch, and the menus are basic and clean looking. It doesn't look half bad overall, at least I don't think it does. The only odd thing is that the typeface changes, when you're choosing the language, but I'm not going to give him that much issue for it. Not a big deal, really. Sound-wise, I'm not really going to go on a whole lot here. It sounds like a hockey game being played in an amphitheater, with the weird echo effect that accompanies each and every sound effect and grunt. Doesn't sound terrible in all honesty, the sounds are almost appropriate to the sport of ice hockey, but the only thing that sticks to mind is that weird echo effect. Other than that, the sound effects are there, nothing sounds out of place. You have the occasional bits of organ music that plays every so often during games. The tunes that play during the intermissions and menus are serviceable, but nothing really special. Sound-wise, it's there, it's okay, not much else to say in that regard. It sounds a bit echoey, and that's about it, really. So here's the deal. I'm not going to lie and say that NHL Stanley Cup is some underappreciated hidden gem or anything of the sort, because I don't think that's the case at all. At the same time, I'm also not going to tell you that Stanley Cup is a horrible hidden turd or anything of the sort, because I don't think that's the case either. For my part, I thought the game was an interesting experiment that takes a while to get used to before you really start to get some enjoyment out of it, but at the same time, I wouldn't want to play something like this ever again. The camera, I do feel, is rather detrimental, especially when it comes to following the action, which is hard to do at times. Control isn't the greatest, especially with a couple notable issues. It's not a terrible hockey game per se. I've certainly played worse. Much worse. But at the same time, I've played better as well. Stanley Cup is one of those games you could find for really, really cheap because I've seen copies in abundance for about $1. And it falls into that category where your mileage may vary. For me, Stanley Cup was neither gem nor junk. It's strictly for curious parties wondering what the fuss was about. Whatever replay value is there to attain is entirely up to you. For me, I think I'll just stick with Blades of Steel or the NHL games. That's just me though.